Thank you very much. I was delighted to be invited to do this. That delight was tempered somewhat by being told I was doing it after Rory, unfortunately. I think it says in the programme, it was pointed out to me earlier, that Peter sells marketing behaviour. I'm not going to sell you anything. I'm not going to sell you marketing behaviour in particular. About an hour ago, I made a decision. It was to bet on this horse. It's running at Wincanton this afternoon. I don't know if anyone knows the horse, probably not. I don't know if the jockey's any good. I don't know if the trainer is doing well with his other horses. I don't know if that horse has done well recently. I don't know about the conditions at Wincanton. I don't even know where Wincanton is, come to think of it. But it was the most irrational decision I've made all year. For about 2 years, I was a professional gambler on horses. As Jim mentioned, I'm now in advertising. It won't be a surprise to some of you that an ad agency is employing somewhat of a chancer. Some people think that professional gambling is a particularly glamorous career. Men, actually, generally think that. Women think you're a bit of a loser. It's not at all glamorous. It's highly stressful. It's very isolating, extremely long hours. The only difference between me and a Chilean miner is about 22 months. But it did allow me to make a living. This is my profit and loss for 4 years. The last 2, I did it full time. And I was attracted to gambling because I liked all the numbers. I liked looking for, in a slightly autistic way, I like looking for all the hidden relationships between data and outcomes. And in racing, there is a lot of data. They call it form. Horses winning history, performance over course and distance, etc. If you go to a bookies, the form's on the wall. The bookies give you the data, which should serve as an indication as to how useful it actually is. But that's what I did. I tried to find a solution in that data. In that data, there's meant to be truth. And I eked out some very small solutions, and that was the problem. I wasn't making enough money. And just before I almost decided to give up, I realised that maybe I should just be looking at the money. In the words of Simon Barnes, racing without gambling is like dancing without sex. And the rise of the betting exchanges allowed me to see all the money flows for and against horses. So I built an application and I started looking at those money flows. And that's important because racing is what I call a knowledge market. These people have more knowledge and these people have less. And if you can spot where each of those people are putting their money, then you have an advantage. So I built my application, I started identifying the smart money. I'd moved from using conventional data, to live behavioural data. I turned a racing problem into a gambling analysis problem. I'd found my edge. I was soon making more money than my job at MTV, which wasn't that difficult. I gave up my job. I sat in my kitchen where my PC was for 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, for 2 years, and I went mad. Now, at this point, you're thinking, why on earth are you telling me this story? I came here on the basis that I was going to hear about marketing and its relationship to human behaviour. Well, I think that there is an obvious comparison. If anyone here is in advertising, I know there are a few people, you have a problem. It's a gambling problem. You gamble every day. You do your research. You try and find your consumer insight. You use a predictive model to understand how consumers are going to respond to a beautiful bit of creativity. You then take that bit of creativity and you place a bet with the media in the market. The only difference is, of course, you don't use your own money. You use your clients. But I think that there are some specific reasons why that story is relevant to today's theme. First one, always check your form. This business is awash with data. Consumer research data, market research data, questionnaires, focus groups, or what I call flawed data. The idea that you can understand human behaviour and motivations behind decision-making by asking someone is naively optimistic. People don't have access to the mechanics, the explicit mechanics and the processes of making decisions. People say and think different things, and sometimes they don't even know what they think. And this has led to a slightly desperate search for the truth behind those answers. In America, you can get your focus groups hypnotized, and you can regress them not back to a previous life, but instead to a slightly less ambitious place, the point just before they decided to buy the alternative brand of cereal. And of course, there's neuroeconomics, neuromarketing. I think we're going to hear a bit more about that. But essentially, that's about understanding the difference between what people say and what people think. And I'm not qualified, nor do I have the time, fortunately, to tell you anything more about that. But what I think we should be doing is do what Apple does, do what a number of successful companies do. They don't rely on consumer research. Asking people their opinion in an innovation business wouldn't mitigate any of your risk. Zara, the largest fashion retailer in the world, this year they reported 63% increase in profits. They don't actually do very much advertising. I think it's less than 1% of their budget is spent on advertising, and nor do they do any consumer research. What they do is they take the live data from every one of their 4,000 stores, and at the end of every day, they analyse each sale in each colour, in each style, in each size, and they feed that data back into their business plan. They're basically a company permanently in beta. And what they're doing with that data is understanding which bets to place. Contrast that with what we tend to do in marketing, particularly in agency land. We come up with a great big idea, we sell that to the client, and we ask them to make one big bet. Now, what I did in my gambling career was I didn't do one bet every 6 months or 3 bets a year. I was doing 30 bets a week. I was trying to mitigate my risk. I was trying to understand via feedback loop what was working and what wasn't. That seems to be a much more pragmatic way to behave. Second reason I think that story is relevant to today, are we using a bad predictive model? The reason we love to ask people why they do certain things is because it fits our model of the mind. The model of the mind as a computer, as an information processing model. This is the cognitive psychological model of the way we work. We like to understand the relationship between stimulus, process and action because that's clearly the logical way people work. Now, I studied cognitive psychology, albeit a few years ago, for about 5 years, together with artificial intelligence, which shares that idea of mind as computer. And I came out disappointed that actually that idea, that model, only explains a subset of behaviour. There's some behaviours where it appears to be action first, think later. And with regard to AI, well, after 70 years, certainly by 2001, we should have had an intelligent computer, albeit one slightly less insecure. But instead, we've created a computer with all the innate intelligence of an ant. And we've only realised that we can do that because ant intelligence is a collective intelligence across the colony. I think that cognitive psychological view on the mind is a perfectly reasonable way to understand it. But what it doesn't do very well is predict behaviour, particularly the complex behaviour that we're interested in. And I think that's because it doesn't model emotion very well. That's kind of a giveaway on this talk, actually, probably. If you look at the academic marketing text, which I know is a bit of a contradiction in terms, there is an ongoing debate around the power of rational messaging versus the power of emotional messaging. When I was gambling, I tried to remove all emotion. There was no hunches, there were no feelings. If the computer said bet, then I bet. But of course, that's not the way people operate. Remember when Nick Clegg made his big splash on the first election debate? He'd clearly been on some sort of NLP course. He repeated people's names. He had a very open stance. He was more vigorous and certainly more novel than the opponents. If we'd had an election that night, it would be Prime Minister Clegg, not Deputy Prime Minister Clegg. It wasn't until later, until we applied some rational application, we realised that wasn't a good idea, perhaps. I think that what people do is that they prioritise emotional stimulus over rational information. Take brand perception. When you think of Burberry, rationally you think of British quality, but overriding your main response is luxury or luxurious. Ryanair, I know most of you probably don't use Ryanair in here, but it's cheap and it will get you to a place near to the place that you want to get to. But the main emotional response when you think of Ryanair is it's a bloody nightmare. And of course, the England team, expensive, deeply, deeply disappointing. It's not just in understanding the world that we use emotions, and emotions are prioritised. It's actually in affecting the world, in making decisions. There's a key role for emotions. And this guy, neuroscientist Damasio, his classic study, he wrote a book called Descartes' Error. Some of you probably read it. Classic case study of a patient, Elliot. Elliot is a stroke victim. Part of his prefrontal cortex has been damaged. He's cognitively unimpaired, totally unimpaired. He can reason, he can use language. The one thing he can't do is express or understand emotion, which will make him a very dull dinner guest, probably. But the main thing that it has an effect on is his inability to make a decision. Damasio talks about trying to make a meeting with him at a restaurant, and Elliot goes through this kind of 30 minutes of cost-benefit analysis. Well, we could go to this restaurant because I've noticed that it's not that busy, but that might mean that the food's not very good. And you said Tuesday. Well, Tuesday I saw it's going to rain, and that means I need to take a different route, and this would go on and on and on. It seems like emotion plays a role that stops you from constantly rationalising and pushing you into making a decision. Darwin, this is my favourite story and most relevant to me because I got engaged last week. It's just me then, bunch of cynics. So he's 29, arguably one of the men who delivered us from the whole civilization, from irrationality. He's applying his scientific mind to the question of whether or not he should get married. He starts writing the pros and cons of getting married. In one column, he writes, well, there's a whole list, but this is one of them. She would be an object to be beloved and played with, better than a dog. And not marry, being forced to visit relatives, and to bend in every trifle. And this list goes on and on. But at the bottom, he gives up. And he writes, it is intolerable to think of spending one's whole life like a neuter-bee, working, only to picture to yourself a nice, soft wife on a sofa. And underneath he writes, marry, QED. And of course that's what he did. And he married his cousin. I always think that's an irony for the father of genetics. But he had 10 kids. And if my fiancée watches this video, 3 is still my final offer. Now, I think it's advertising's role, or one of advertising's role, is to conjure up the image of the nice, soft wife on a sofa for the consumer, to push them from rationality and into decision-making. Finally, the moral of the story is the story. The reason I told you that gambling story is because that's what humans do. They tell stories. They understand the world via rational narrative, and they understand people via emotional cues. They empathise via those emotional cues. If you speak to an evolutionary psychologist as to why stories came about, he'll tell you that there are 2 ways to learn about saber-toothed tigers. One is to have an up-close experience with a saber-toothed tiger, and the other one is that your mate tells you that saber-toothed tigers are bad via a story. It's self-evident the power of stories. TED is an archive of stories. The reason why there are 100 organisations that are currently rudderless today, who knows what's going on in your offices, is because you've been lured here to listen to stories all day. And the expansion of TED is pretty remarkable. 50 million video views to 300 million in 1 year. Now, this is an aside. I haven't actually cleared this with the organisers, and it's not very TED, but you're probably going to tell that advertising and me is probably not going to work out. So I've been working on a side project, and I know there are a number of dragons in the room, So I'm hoping that you might just take 2 minutes of time to hear my little pitch. I'm looking for 100K for 1% of my company. It's a restaurant. It's a very picturesque location. Doesn't have a telephone because it's in a very rural area. BT couldn't get there. Because of that, you have to come into the restaurant to book a table, and really I want you to come in at least a day before. It's just a rule. Getting to the restaurant is quite difficult. It's quite treacherous. There is a chance you may fall off a cliff into the sea on the way. There's no choice. There's no menu. When you arrive, you get what I give you. And like Zara, we're not going to do any promotion of any kind. Is anyone in? Of course, I don't need to do that because there is a restaurant like this. It's in Ibiza. It's called El Bigot, after the mustachioed owner. It's kind of a concrete shack. And it's like a number of concrete shack sort of restaurants on the beaches in Ibiza. And you have to crawl along this rock face to get to it. My fiancée there is nearly falling off. And that's the sea that you might fall into. And when you get there, that's what you're given. If you don't like fish, then you may as well not go to this place because that is the only dish that they do. Now, what this place has got is a story. And the story is quite short, and sticky stories tend to be. The story is King Juan Carlos of Spain, easy for me to say, and his fragrant wife, Queen Sophia, here with a panda, moored their boat outside the restaurant, tootled up to the restaurant and said, "Have you got a table?" And they checked their records, and the king and the queen hadn't been in the day before to reserve their table, so they were turned away. Now that story, everyone knows who goes to that restaurant, and it's packed every single day. The hairdresser that I do go to a hairdresser, told me that story, and when she told me it, we were having a hairdresser holiday chat, obviously at the time, I realised that I was going to be compelled to go to that place when we landed in Ibiza. When I bought my €50 fish stew, I wasn't just buying the fish, I was exchanging money for social currency. And that social currency allows me to tell other people, and now I'm part of the story, and I've just cashed in my social currency in front of 100 people. I've done pretty well on that bargain, I think. This is my favourite definition of a brand. A brand is a customer's gut feeling about a product, service or company. They bring order out of clutter. That's exactly what that story did. It made me decide. It made it easy for me to decide what to do. It arranged my life for me in a small way. I think that effective brands are, in effect, effective stories. And I hope by this point, bless you, you're asking yourself, what's my story? Thank you very much.